Hello everyone, and on behalf of ANROWS, I'd like to invite you to today's webinar. Listen up, hear from young people about their understandings of domestic violence. My name is Padma Raman, I'm the CEO of ANROWS. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the country on which we meet today. I'm coming to you from Gadigal land and pay my respects to the Gadigal peoples of the Eora Nation. On behalf of ANROWS, I pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. Wherever we are today, we're on unceded Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander land, and I acknowledge and pay respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this session today. Today's webinar will be facilitated by Deanne Carson, CEO and founder of Body Safety Australia, and Lauren French, lead educator, Body Safety Australia. For the first time, we're also joined by Tatum Kenner, who is a graphic recorder and will be illustrating the webinar conversations live today. Before I hand over to Deanne and Lauren, I'd just like to share some housekeeping information with you. We'll first hear a presentation by our own Dr. Erin Carlisle, highlighting the key evidence on young people's understanding of domestic violence and abuse. Following the presentation, we will have a panel discussion where you'll be able to hear directly from young people. The panel discussion will be followed by a live Q&A, so please send through questions at any time during the discussion, and the panel will try and answer as many questions as possible. Please be mindful when asking questions that today is an opportunity to ask young people directly about their understandings of domestic violence and abuse and their solutions. The research report and resources related to the topic discussed today are available in the handout section of GoToWebinar on the right side of your screen. If you would like to access closed captions, please click on the link provided in the chat box. The webinar will be recorded and will be available on the ANROWS website as soon as possible, as will the illustrations you will see come to life today. You can subscribe to Notepad e-newsletter to be notified of when these are available. Finally, we have a survey that'll pop up as you exit the webinar. If you could take a couple of minutes to complete it, we would really appreciate your feedback. Your responses help us improve our program in the future. This is a confronting topic and some participants might find it distressing. It's important to take care of yourself while watching this webinar. If you'd like to access support, please contact 1-800-RESPECT on 1-800-737-732, Kids Helpline on 1-800-55-1800, or Lifeline on 131114. Today's webinar launches ANROWS research. It depends on what your definition of domestic violence is, how young people conceptualise domestic violence abuse. Following the 2017 NCAS, or National Community Attitude Survey, results for young people, this qualitative study aimed to unpack how young people define and make sense of domestic violence in their own terms. The report launching today reinforces the need to rethink, challenge and improve the way domestic violence and abuse is talked about in education, the media, primary prevention, policy and practice, so that young people in the broader community can recognise domestic violence and abuse as well as play their part in preventing it from happening in the first place. We will also be launching a series of videos that bring this new research to life. A special thank you to digital storytellers who produced the videos and the group of youth advocates who co-designed the videos with us. Some of our panelists here today were involved in both the co-design, workshop and filming of the videos. Thanks also to Rachel from R for Respect and Andrew from Men for Respect, who provided their expert advice along the way. I would now like to introduce Deanne Carson, CEO and founder of Body Safety Australia, and Lauren French, lead educator, Body Safety Australia, who will facilitate today's discussion. Body Safety Australia is a not-for-profit organisation providing collaborative community solutions to foster robust, respectful relationships with children and young people. Deanne and Lauren, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Padma. I know we're very excited to be co-facilitating this panel today with young people. Before we get started though, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that Diane and I are both calling on from today. We are on beautiful Wurundjeri country of the Kulin Nation, and I would like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I would like to pay my respects to my elders from the Gurudjari tribe and acknowledge where I call home, which is on Larrakia land. I would like to acknowledge where everybody in this webinar is calling in from today, the land that you work on, that looks after you, that you learn on, that guides you, and that has gotten you here today. Thank you so much for coming together to have these incredibly important conversations, which I'm very excited about, and I know Diane is very excited about as well.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you, Padma, for the introduction as well. What I would like to go through first is to introduce our panelists, and I'm very grateful for the young people who are here today and giving us their time, their thoughts on the research, and also being available to answer your questions. So our presenters today, first I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Erin Carlisle, who is the Senior Research Officer from the NCAS research team at ANROWS. Hi, Erin. Next, I'd like to introduce Alicia Saeed from R for Respect, Youth Ambassador, and we're looking forward to hearing from you this afternoon, Alicia. And Zach Tuiali, also from R for Respect, Youth Ambassador, but Men for Respect. So Zach works with young men. And finally, Jean Lewis, who is Youth Commissioner for Wellbeing, Health and Youth Commission at Western Sydney University. Thanks for coming, Jean. And Tatum, who's already been introduced, who will be illustrating the conversations that we're having throughout the webinar. We were also meant to be hearing from Malika, who is a youth advocate at Queensland Family and Child Commission Youth Advisory Council. Unfortunately, Malika will not be able to join us this afternoon, but I know that Malika really had a lot of input in the lead up to this conversation, and we wanted to acknowledge her contribution in planning the webinar and the videos that we are launching today. So the report that we're looking at sought to find out what counts as domestic violence for young people, and how do young people conceptualise or make sense of domestic violence. Erin, can you tell us a little bit more about the study, please?
I sure can. Thanks, Diane. And I'm just going to share my screen, so hopefully this is successful. So to give you an overview of the research, I'll talk today about 3 Ps. Firstly, the purpose of the study. Secondly, the perspective we took. And thirdly, the procedure we used, or the methodology. First off, our study was prompted by the results from the 2017 National Community Attitudes Towards Violence Against Women survey, and more specifically by the results for young people aged 16 to 24. In 2017, young people's results were compared against those for 25 to 64-year-olds. And compared with this older cohort, the results suggested that young people had poorer understandings of violence against women, and in particular, the authors named 3 areas of concern in young people's understandings. Now, the first area of concern related to the prevalence of violence against women. The NCAS in 2017 asked whether respondents thought violence against women is common in the community. As shown in the 2 grey columns with the arrows here, young men were much less likely than young women to see violence against women as common in the community. And we can also see that young men's understandings have remained lower over multiple waves of the survey too, as in the middle chart there. And second, the next area of concern related to the different forms of violence against women. Like older age groups, young people understood and could identify the physical forms of domestic violence, but young people were less likely to recognise certain non-physical behaviours, such as emotional abuse, as forms of domestic violence in and of themselves. And looking closer at the results, many young people did not necessarily see certain non-physical behaviours as always constituting domestic violence. For example, 1 in 5 young people saw financial abuse as usually domestic violence, while another 1 in 5 saw financial abuse as only sometimes domestic violence. All of this suggests that there might be some grey areas in the ways young people categorise behaviours as always or only sometimes domestic violence, and this was something we had to look further into. And the third so-called area of concern related to the gendered nature of domestic violence. The gendered nature of domestic violence means the understanding that men are more likely to commit domestic violence and that women are more likely to suffer physical harm and fear from domestic violence. while most young people recognise this, there was still a gender difference. Young men were less likely than young women to see men as the main perpetrators of DV. And importantly, the results also showed a decrease over time, as shown in this chart, in young people's understandings that men are the main users of domestic violence. So it shifted from 75% of young people in 2009 down to 60% of young people in 2017. Over time, there also appeared to be a slow shift in perceptions that men and women equally perpetrate violence. So with all of this in mind, my job in leading the research was to explore exactly what was going on and why young people appeared to have less understanding about domestic violence than older age groups, and why their understanding seemed to be changing over time. So now onto the perspectives that we took in this study, specifically the why, how we approach the problem, what the literature says, and the aims of the project. So first, we needed to think about why this study matters. Young people are seen as a key group for domestic violence prevention in Australia. There's two main reasons, along with a lot of other ones. So firstly, as a group, young women are at high risk of experiencing violence. And statistically, young men are increasingly being identified as a key group who use violence, and especially sexual violence. Second, education with children and young people in schools is seen as a key long-term method for preventing violence against women. By fostering positive attitudes and understandings through schools over time, young people are seen as agents for bringing about positive generational change to prevent and eradicate domestic violence in Australia. But if young people are agents of change for the prevention of domestic violence and violence against women more broadly, then we need to design initiatives and programs in their language and to address their wants and needs. So there is a need to explore what young people understand and how they came to these understandings on their own terms. And if we centre young people as agents of change in preventing violence, we need to look at these issues from their perspective. But much of the existing work done in this area is done from an adult perspective. Generally speaking, young people are rarely given opportunities to co-design initiatives or to meaningfully participate in research conducted on them. Young people's perceptions of relationship violence remain largely talked about and researched in an adult way. In fact, another scholar working in this field said that much research on the topic of violence has neglected simply asking young people what they think. Instead, adults are seen as the beacons of knowledge, while in society more broadly, young people are often unfairly stereotyped as passive or naive or unknowing or risk-taking and irresponsible, both in need of protection and in need of correction. So to counter these ideas and to properly see the topic from young people's perspective, we adopted a critical youth studies approach in this study. I won't discuss this at length now, but a critical youth studies approach means putting young people at the centre so that the research doesn't just involve young people, but centres their ideas and their understandings as co-contributors to knowledge. At the same time as centering young people's ideas, we had to de-center adult ideas and frameworks so that we could learn about what counts as domestic violence from young people's point of view. Through these processes, we sought to learn from young people and to learn about the topic in young people's own terms. Next, what perspectives had the existing literature taken? For the purposes of this overview, I'll keep it again to three main points. First, really interestingly, there's no single or universally accepted definition of domestic violence used in research or policy in Australia and elsewhere. So while domestic violence is a common term, this term is not used across the board and sometimes means or includes different things in different contexts. So when we say that young people have a lesser understanding of domestic violence, this is almost an unfair claim when there's no single definition, even in Australia. And second, a lot of research has been conducted on young people's experiences of and attitudes about domestic violence. But young people's understandings of such violence haven't been given as much attention, especially in Australian research and especially in qualitative research. The emerging literature has focused primarily on what they understand, but less attention has been paid to how they come to these understandings and why they might understand aspects of domestic violence in certain ways. And thirdly, research has examined the ways that young people make sense of domestic violence or violence more generally through the lens of gender stereotypes. That is, that young people can often think about domestic violence by reflecting on commonly held assumptions about men and women's respective gender roles or stereotypical behaviours. So for example, that men are stereotypically more violent because they're naturally aggressive and things like that. But a small amount of other research has shown that young people also adopt strategies to de-gender their discussions about domestic violence. So, for example, some have shown how young men disassociate themselves from the issue of domestic violence. Other studies have shown how young people overstate or distort the extent of women's perpetration of violence. And there are examples of young women not wanting to be inherently positioned as victims in violence against women discussions on the basis of their gender. All of these degendering strategies and why young people might engage in this degendering haven't really been thoroughly explored, and especially not in Australia. So finally, this takes us to the aims of the study. What exactly did we want to know? From the research gaps and areas of concern in the NCAS findings, we wanted to know what young people think constitutes domestic violence and how young people conceptualise domestic violence. We also wanted to explore these questions from these angles as shown by the arrows on the slides, such as if and how young people think domestic violence is distinct from unhealthy behaviours, so that we can unpack and understand the grey areas where behaviours might only sometimes be seen as DV. We also wanted to explore how young people think about domestic violence as common or uncommon in the community and how they think about the gendered nature of domestic violence. So this brings us to P number 3, the procedure. And there are 3 main things I'll mention, again, 3s, in relation to the method. So first, we developed 30 short fictional scenarios to generate data. Some examples of the scenarios are on the post-its on the slide. The scenarios depicted a range of relationship behaviours, including some healthy and unhealthy behaviours, as well as non-physical and physical forms of violence and abuse. The scenarios were written to depict the behaviours as they might occur in real life, but with really little background context so that they had to make sense of what was going on. We also gave the characters in the scenarios gender-neutral names, and we did all of this to effectively give the young people a blank slate for their own interpretations so that they could consider and provide their own understandings of what was going on, about which behaviours they thought were abusive and violent, and then we could explore if and how and why young people, the participants, gendered or degendered the scenarios. Secondly, we got participants to complete a short online survey in the days leading up to their focus group. The young people were asked to rate whether the behaviours in the scenarios were okay, sometimes okay, or not okay. We then used this data to give us some information about what percentage of participants saw each behaviour in these categories, mostly around the sometimes okay or not okay. And participants were asked to pick a number of scenarios that they felt really strongly about and to give a short description about why they rated the scenarios the way they did. And finally, number 3, we ran focus groups to unpack all of these ideas further. So we ran 14 focus groups in total, 7 with young men and 7 with young women, and each group had around 4 to 6 participants each. Thanks to COVID and travel restrictions, we ran the focus groups on Zoom, and each discussion went for around 90 minutes. We discussed a range of things in the focus groups, including healthy and unhealthy relationship behaviours, as well as ideas of domestic violence as gendered or as a common problem in Australia. Most of the time in the focus groups was spent on a task-based activity. So we picked 10 of the scenarios and we had them on the post-its that you can see on the slide. And we got the young people as a group to discuss what they thought was happening in the scenario and to decide together as a group whether and why the scenario was okay, sometimes okay, or not okay. We would then draw a tick or an S or a cross on the scenario post-it at the end of the discussion. After discussing each one in turn, we then looked at the group of 10 scenarios together to consider whether they thought any were normal or common in relationships, or if they thought that any or several of the scenarios constituted domestic violence for them. We then analysed all of this data using reflexive thematic analysis techniques to develop latent themes and uncover the ways that the young people were thinking about domestic violence. And finally, just a little bit of background about who we spoke to. We spoke with 80 young people aged 16 to 18 from all across Australia, including 41 young women and 39 young men. We spoke with 16 to 18-year-olds so that the findings could directly inform prevention initiatives with school-age young people. The young people that we spoke to came from all across the country, as you can see in the chart on the slide. Most lived in major cities, but around 1 in 4 or 1/4 of our sample were from regional and remote areas. We also had a mix of migrant and cultural backgrounds. A number of the young people were born outside of Australia, and around 3 in 10 reported a family cultural background other than English. And Italian, Egyptian, Chinese, Lebanese, and Indian were some of the family backgrounds that they mentioned. And we had one Aboriginal and a Torres Strait Islander participant in the study. 3/4 of our participants were in high school, and around half of them were working part-time or casually. And the young people in our study were mostly really very confident. Some were a little bit shy, so it took a little bit of encouragement to come out of their shell. But overall, they were thoughtful and passionate about the topic and eager to share their various ideas. They also made jokes with each other and with the researchers and built a really friendly kind of environment together, but at the same time as sensitively and thoughtfully engaging with the topic of domestic violence. Importantly, they saw domestic violence as something that needs to be talked about more openly in society. And I think this final point is a really great spot to throw back to Dion and Lauren to introduce the first set of findings and key messages arising from the study.
Thank you so much, Erin, for that really comprehensive kind of breakdown of the research. It's always incredible to hear directly from young people, and I think when we go through this report, it's definitely mirroring a lot of what Dion and I are seeing in the classrooms in the day-to-day. So it's really amazing to have this sort of piece of work to reference and to look through and to really hear those voices. So thank you so much. So we're going to start the panel and the discussion with the first theme, which was around the fact that in the research, it was found that young people often pointed to portrayals in the media as their basis for their ideas around what constituted domestic violence. But they also felt that outside of that media, there was much more to domestic violence than the sensationalized or really extreme cases that they were seeing. So before we go to our panel and have a little bit of a chat, we're going to be playing the first video, which talks through this point a little bit more.
I definitely get the feeling that like the stories the media shares about domestic violence are only the most extreme cases that we ever hear about. I think they often say things like horrific, one-off murder, suicide, things like that, just very sensationalized language. Often the perpetrator is portrayed as like an anomaly in society, when that's often not the case. Like, I think the statistics show that it's very common for domestic violence to occur.
Often we hear the term domestic violence, we think about the physical, the punching, the stabbing, the murders we see online. That's what we hear, so that's what we think about when we think of domestic violence. But you don't think about what's led up to that point and the cycle that domestic violence is that leads it to that one moment.
There was a very extreme case where a man had murdered his entire family, and he was portrayed as an awful monster in the media, and then we didn't think any further about maybe what were the things that led up to that happening, what were the more subtle forms of abuse that were occurring before that final action. So I think the media just never really takes a nuanced look at how domestic violence can occur and kind of a holistic perspective on all the events that lead up to it.
I think it's important that we talk about it before people experience it. You don't want to have to get to that extreme case in the media. You want to be aware of the red flags and the warning signs that come with toxic relationships and be able to have tools to get yourself out of those relationships as well.
All right, so I think that's a reflection on, a lot of the information that we have about domestic violence is in the media, and it is, obviously the the very pointy end, the very violent end of domestic and family violence. I'd really like to hear from the young people now what their impressions of that are, and and how we kind of bridge this young people's understanding when this is what we're hearing in the media. So maybe we can start with you, Jen. What are your initial thoughts when you see a video like that, that shows that very violent end of domestic violence, and how that impacts how we can talk with young people?
It's really confronting. And I live in Blacktown, and the rates of domestic violence are pretty high here. And usually the media I consume is like on TikTok and stuff like that. And there's a lot of like very solid sides to like where you're getting your media as well. Like there's already a bias with whoever's providing it. So as a young person, like I try not to look into those things because it is very upsetting, but it's obviously like important to keep in your mind that there's a lot that goes into a story.
And I think that you've raised something really important there, Jean. I think that when we're talking about the media, we're not just talking about the headlines, the front page of the newspaper or the #1 story that is running at the 6 o'clock news. We're also talking about social media and the way that domestic violence is represented in social media as well. Alicia and Zach, I'm really curious, has how we consume social media changed how young people are, thinking about domestic violence, the young people that you work with?
I can guess. So I think with the consumption of social media within our young people, there has been some positive things that have come from social media, and whether it's looking at infographics and you're learning more about what red flags are or what unhealthy traits within relationships. But then also with that, there has been that negative side that has also been pushed of whether it's on TikToks and it's like, oh, like if my man doesn't act like this, I don't want him. And it could be pushing negative or unhealthy traits within different genders. So yeah.
Yeah, just to touch on what Alicia was saying, I think a lot of very harmful behaviors are glorified on social media. So things like cheating or things like stalking your exes is something so okay, especially to younger people nowadays. So I think that's a really big issue I've seen on social media. It's just the glorifying of unhealthy and violent behaviors. So yeah.
So thank you. So when you're talking with young people, and and when when we roll out things like respectful relationships education, and we're talking about the media, and we're talking about the headlines, talking about where somebody murdered a family member or hospitalized a family member, are you finding that that actually resonates with young people's experience because of what they're consuming on social media, or whether it's a very different conversation that you're having?
I think sometimes it can be different, but sometimes it's really dependent. A lot of answers we hear are a lot of the kids are survivors of domestic and family violence. So in those instances, kids can really relate, and it is really their real lived experiences which help us really connect with them better and help them receive our messages a lot better. In other cases, some kids might be a bit more sheltered, I guess. I don't know if that's not the right term, but this is the best way I can describe it right now. But so it's very, very case dependent, but especially in a low socioeconomic area like Logan, where we're from, it is very, very common for there to be a lot of survivors in the room. And especially with the young people that we work with. So yeah.
I think Zach's pretty much said it all. So yeah.
I'd be really curious to hear from everyone around, you know, we kind of talked about, as you said, the working with groups of young people who have experienced this firsthand. And I'd be curious how we've heard from young people around how they take kind of the almost trivializing or joking aspects of like red flag behavior online, like the idea of, oh, if they like pineapple on pizza, that's a red flag, and like the kind of linking that as if that is the same as like an abusive red flag. And I'm curious if that's been something we've been hearing from young people. Yeah, Jane, if you want to go.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting that you brought that up because, for example, like this happens all the time on like TikTok and Instagram, and those apps are like basically echo chambers because the algorithm like gives you what they know you already believe and stuff. But there's something called canceling, and cancel culture is like a thing, but it's so broad and vague that like someone that like ate pineapple and pizza, for example, is grouped in the same like group under the name of like, oh, they're cancelled for having like a controversial opinion, as someone who like said the N-word or like was a predator or something like that. And it's just like you can't generalize these people as the same because there's such different, like it's so multifaceted that you can't just say cancelled. And some people, like, that ruins people's lives because it gets lost in translation, the severity of the situation and stuff like that. And I think that's really harmful for like kids to learn.
No, definitely. Alicia, did you want to say something to that as well?
I was just going to add that a lot of sometimes red flags can be trivialized because of, as you said, you know, eating pineapple on pizza or this or that. It can kind of be brushed off. And you can be like, oh, you're just being dramatic, or, you know, like gaslit and everything like that. So sometimes red flags can be trivialized, which is a bit of a negative thing. So, yeah.
So how does this, you know, when we bring it back to thinking about the media and thinking about, you know, when we're actually talking about domestic violence, you know, we're making the examples that we're still using are, you know, the murders, you know, the really horrific violent acts where people, you know, not just murder their partner, but also perhaps murder their children or extended family members as well. How do we reconcile that with young people or who are making jokes about red flags being pineapple on pizza, but also who are perhaps living with family violence as well? Like, how do we help young people make sense of those three very different things?
I think it's important to get real specific, I guess, and using language that differentiates the three different extremes of the what is
Spectrum,
it? Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't find the words, but I mean, the way we go about it is to help kids understand is we simplify things, but not to oversimplify it, but just to help them understand how different different acts or behaviors might be. So I think in that way it is important. Yeah, it's just to be very, very specific, but not to the point where you're oversimplifying things and brushing other things aside.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, Zach. I think that you know, in a lot of the spaces that we've worked in, we see adults wanting to use euphemisms when talking about any types of violence or gender-based violence or family violence, and you know, actually what you're saying is we need to be specific. We need to give real life examples for the young people to help them navigate that. Yeah, awesome. The next topic that we wanted to talk about this afternoon was how young people think about toxic and unhealthy behaviours that lead to domestic violence and abuse. So the young people in this study said that there's much more to domestic violence than the extreme cases in the media. Erin, could you briefly recap how the young people in your study described domestic violence? You're muted.
Oh, we can't hear you.
Doing so well.
That's right, there you go.
Yeah, I'm back. So sure, yes, I can recap what the behaviours, how they conceptualise domestic violence in the study. So they conceptualise it in a range of ways, not only in terms of the types of behaviours, like explicit forms of physical violence or the more subtle kinds of emotional abuse, but also as a pattern of repeated and intentionally abusive behaviour. So they discussed how this pattern of violence has like a snowballing kind of effect, and like growing or escalating to the point where the victim survivor feels trapped or isolated. In effect, the young people were describing a pattern of coercive control, but using their own language through the snowballing and trapping kind of metaphors. They also discussed how this pattern of violence and abuse goes, or rather grows, along a continuum. So they described how toxic relationship behaviors or things that are not okay, such as being manipulative or bullying your partner or treating them like a possession, are like the initial stepping stones towards more abusive behavior. And these stepping stones can then snowball and escalate from toxic behaviors to more serious forms of abuse, and then snowballing further to extreme forms of physical violence and severe coercive control.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Erin. On that kind of idea of stepping stones, and more going into this theme, we're going to play the second video now where the amazing Nagma from For Respect is going to talk a little bit more around this topic and go into it a little bit more deeply. So video time.
I think it can be difficult to recognize toxic behaviors because of how it's become so normalized. We try and have conversations about care versus control, and what that can look like is you're in a relationship with somebody and you tell them, hey, I'm going to go to this place for lunch and I'll be back in a certain amount of time. But as anything in life, plans change and you could end up across the road eating somewhere else. So it's in that situation you have to think, is this person asking you why you've changed your location because they care about you or because they're trying to control you? The point where you could recognize, hey, this is getting a bit much, is when you think you're doing the right thing, but this person's trying to convince you that you're not, and they're denying your experiences. When you begin to question yourself and not feel comfortable in who you are anymore is when you could realize that I don't know if this is the right thing for me. There are certain stepping stones that lead to the heightened impact of domestic violence. And there are stepping stones such as, checking someone's location, asking for their password, monitoring how they dress or who they're hanging out with. I think education, especially respectful relationships education, is so important because it gives young people the tools and knowledge that they need to better prepare themselves for the relationships that they'll face in the future. And I think it needs to be more than just a tick box for schools, because it's so much deeper and there's so much to unpack.
I'm really excited to hear from the young people about this idea of stepping stones, because from what the research was showing, it's curious that young people are moving away from the kind of classic title of domestic violence and into a space of domestic violence and abuse. And I'm wondering from the young people on the panel why we think we're transitioning away from just the standard domestic violence title with young people. And Jean, I might throw to you to start.
Oh yeah, no problem. So a lot of the time, like, people not only don't know when their like partner or their family or their friends are being toxic, but they don't know when they're being toxic themselves. And for example, like, I went to school with a lot of people, like, when you're young, like, you do know people that have been assaulted, and you do know people that have assaulted people. And a lot of the time, the people that I've known that have like assaulted someone, or they've been toxic towards someone, they thought like the consent was important for like that one big thing. Like they didn't think there were little actions and activities that you need to make sure every party's okay with. And I think that's really important to how the person speaking pointed out, that respectful relationships is really important to be educated on, because like it comes from both sides of the person who's that toxicity is inflicted on, and from whoever's portraying the toxicity, where like everyone's definition of toxic is different as well, where and even what Zach said earlier about how like defining things and like boiling it down to like simple ways that are so clear, because there's such a big gray area in a topic like this.
Jean, I love how you're bringing in the both sides of the space in the domestic violence. And I think it is very easy to kind of talk from like a victim side or a perpetrator side, but that idea of, respect relationships is talking about everyone involved in a relationship.
Yeah, we're all people. Like we all make mistakes sometimes, but we all are capable of making informed decisions as well.
Yeah. Alicia and Zach, I'm curious if you have any thoughts around that idea of moving away from domestic violence to domestic, violence and abuse, and that kind of line between the two, I guess.
From my experience working with young people, when they hear the word domestic violence, a lot of the time they focus solely on the word violence, which to them is just physical violence. So I think by adding just the simple word abuse at the end, it helps them understand that that there are non-physical factors in that same space, with domestic violence, other than physical violence. There could be the coercive control, or the gaslighting, or things like that. So I think that maybe, well, from my own experience, that's one reason why young people find it easier to understand domestic violence and abuse, as opposed to just domestic violence as a standalone label, I guess.
Yeah. Following on from what Zach was saying, I think, it shines a light on the different forms of violence, whether it be financial, whether it be verbal, mental, emotional, coercive control, as Zach was saying. And I guess it also shines a light on unhealthy behaviors that sometimes just go unnoticed, or kind of just passed off as, don't worry about it. It shines a light on that and says, hey, actually, this isn't okay. This is a bit of a red flag, maybe you should start thinking about, have they done other things that might not be okay and might be red flags and might be unhealthy. So I think it allows young people to view domestic violence and abuse, and all of the forms of abuse as a wider spectrum. So they're able to like conceptualize it as different forms and be like, so it's not just domestic, it's like this, it's like that. So
yeah, amazing. And I'm really curious with the work you do with young people, if we're seeing that domestic violence and abuse is portrayed or viewed as an adult problem, or if it's something that young people are able to connect with their own relationships, because that's definitely something I see in teaching respect for relationships, that sometimes the examples young people want to give me is always about older adults, it's about people with kids, it's about this idea of this adult thing that isn't happening now with young people. And I'm curious if that's something that you were seeing as well. The joyful the mouse button clicking moment.
Sorry, I just completely forgot what I was going to say. Do you want to go, Zach?
Yeah. So a lot of the young people, because I work with specifically men or young boys. So a lot of the boys that I work with say that they do think it is an adult problem, and a lot of them don't actually realize that they themselves are survivors as well, because they just haven't been educated on the certain topics. And Yeah, so they do generally think that the issue isn't something that involves them or something that they can help change, I guess.
Yeah, so I think with that also is within social media and media, as we were talking about before, a lot of the stories that are portrayed on media are the extreme cases where it's gotten to a deadly end and a deadly result. So with a lot of young people, they're like, oh, but like when I see it in the news or when I see it in social media, it's people who are married or people who are in like long-term relationships. And I think when we do our workshops, we like to make it known that when we say respectful relationships, it can be relationships between a mother and a son. It could be a relationship between you and a friend, like any type of relationship, and not specifically a romantic relationship or something like that. So yeah.
Yeah, amazing.
I think that there's a lot of tension in what I'm hearing here, that young people have this knowing that, you know, domestic violence that ends in death is bad and it shouldn't happen. And, you know, and if I thought that somebody was at risk, you know, in that, then I would flag it or do something about it. But also they're starting to understand, you know, what they've described as the snowballing or the stepping stones, or you know, those earlier signs that that relationship is not a healthy relationship. And I think that, you know, these conversations that are being had in the classroom and between young people, you know, are starting to, you know, work in that prevention space where they're starting to address the signs of, you know, potentially abusive behaviours earlier on. And I think, and I just want to sort of segue at this point to talk about our next topic, because I'm also seeing this in the classroom when we talk about consent. You know, I'm seeing that young people have a really clear understanding of what's not okay, that physically violent sexual relationships are not relationships, they're not sex, you know, that they're against the law, but they're having these more nuanced conversations about what a lot of adults see as that grey space in between. And I know that consent has been a really, really hot topic in Australia in the last, you know, probably 5 years. And there are some amazing young people who have spoken up in the last sort of 12 to 24 months. And I know that, you know, one of the young people has said consent comes in all forms. So like Nagma talked about in the video, the young people in the studies said that they understood that, you know, consent is things like invading somebody's personal space or their boundaries or doing something behind their backs, you know. So they were able to give clear examples of where there had been no consent, and they understood that fundamentally that's not okay. So I'd love to hear from you. You know, does this broader concept of consent resonate with you? Is this the discussions that you're hearing with the people that you work with or with your peers? Maybe we can start with you, Jean.
I think that's a really good thing to bring up. I feel like consent, like when I was learning PE like a couple of years ago, like like all of the examples and stuff, I'm just going to take a little segue because it's Pride Month, I have to bring the quick video into it. But I think that there's a huge gap in like sexual education with the LGBTQI plus community, and like equality for marginalized groups is necessary for all students to feel safe making decisions inside the classroom and outside of the classroom. When I was in PE personally, like all the scenarios that had to do around consent between queer like couples, those were skipped by my educators, and they were just not spoken about at all, and they were all like very centered around cisgendered heterosexual people. And like even if the curriculum changes, like teachers still need to believe in like LGBTQI plus rights and like promote them. And school is one of the most important like social institutions that a child will go through in their lifetime, in my opinion. And like teachers need to be educated and trained on these topics because they need to provide like all students of different gender identities and sexual orientations like equal opportunities to learn about consent in all different types of ways.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for bringing up the fact that it is Pride Month. And
Happy Pride Month.
at Body Safety, we hear this over and over again from young people that our consent education, that our respect for relationships education does not include LGBTIQA plus young people, or if it does, it's from a very tokenistic point of view. Alicia and Zach, did you want to talk about young people's experience of consent education in schools and whether it's improved at all or whether it's reflective of their lived experience?
Sure. Yeah, a lot of the young people we've spoken to, either one, haven't received any consent education at all in school, or two, it was very, very vague. Or as Jean was saying, a lot of the questions to do with the LGBTIQ plus community were skipped over or just weren't addressed at all. So yeah, it was very varied. But a lot of the times it wasn't sufficient enough from our experience. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think as like Zach was saying, a lot of the young people didn't really understand that consent can be, taken away at any time, or you need consent for even holding hands, or kissing on the cheek, like the small things, and it's not just like having sex. And like consent is needed for all things, and it can be taken away at any point in time. So yeah. Yeah,
I would have to agree that there's a lot of spaces where we're still watching the cup of tea video and then just going, great, we're done with that. And the next area, and I think that this fits into that fairly well, is that has come up through the research, is around gender stereotypes and this idea of fairness and domestic violence and abuse. So one of the things that came out of the research that I personally found really fascinating was what the researchers and Our Watch call a gender ignoring lens, where young people argued that gender doesn't and shouldn't matter when we're talking about violence in relationships, and what should matter is just actually weighing up the evidence, of those two people as individuals. So we're being fair. We're not sort of applying what we know about the gendered nature of domestic violence and imposing that on people who are having experience. So they were kind of rejecting the gender stereotypes and basing their understandings on this idea of fairness and treating everybody the same. And Alicia, I'm wondering in your work whether that's something that that young people, particularly young women, have expressed to you, that we have to sort of take gender out of this conversation and just look at whether this is fair or not.
Well, I know with our work we do look at it through a gendered lens. I've only done a couple of workshops and observed some, but from what I've seen, there hasn't really been an issue with looking at it through a gendered lens. We have had some young women come up in the classrooms and say, but hey, men get abused too. And we say, yes, we acknowledge that yeah, men are victims of domestic violence, but statistics do show that generally men are the perpetrators, whether it is men on men violence or men on women violence. So we do make sure that we acknowledge the fact that there are a lot of young men out there who are victims of domestic and family violence and abuse. But yeah.
What about you, Zach? Have you come across that? Because I know that you work predominantly with boys and young men. Have you come across this idea that we need to be fair in our conversation rather than and pushing back on the idea that domestic violence is a gendered crime?
Yeah, definitely. We've come across it a lot, especially now with the very popular Depp and Heard case. A lot of boys refer back to that case and use that as an example to what's the word? to strengthen the argument. Yeah. I guess I don't know if that's the right word. I can't think right now. Sorry, but yeah, to strengthen the argument that that it is non-gendered, but the way we bring them back to the facts and to reality is, like Alicia was saying, we give them I don't know if the stats are updated now with the new report, but the previous stats were 95% of all victims reported that, they reported that 95% of the perpetrators were male, whether that be male on male or male on female. So yeah, that's how we kind of bring them back to reality, I guess.
Yeah. And Lauren, I know you're facilitating today, but I'd actually really love to hear from you on this point, because I know that you have worked with teenagers as young as 12, 13, 14 years old, who have really, really strongly demonstrated this gender ignoring lens. So yeah, I think it's a really important for people to understand.
Yeah, it's really curious when I talk to groups of young people and we go through things like, respectful relationships, when we talk about domestic violence, when we talk about the statistics, when we talk about perpetrators, I often get the idea that actually women lie a lot. Like, that's something that I hear quite a bit. And yes, after the Depp Heard publicized, all the social media, all the et cetera, the things that people were sending, these memes of like, see, this proves all women lie all the time. And and when I show the statistics of actually what, false reports actually look like, there's this still like, nah, that's probably not true. It is probably still higher. And this kind of root-seated belief of, oh yes, like, but actually we can't say this is a gendered issue, we can't do it. And I think it comes a little bit occasionally from people wanting to be in a really gender neutral space at times, and then wanting to be like, no, I'm gender neutral, I'm this, like, I'm 100% fair, therefore I will never say this is a gendered issue. Even when I start to go through statistics and things, because I do the same thing, Zach, of that, okay, here's what the statistics look like, here's what it actually is, like, did you know this? And they go, oh yeah, but, and it's always the, oh yeah, but, and it's the, oh, but you've got to take everything case by case, oh, but you've got to do this. And I think, yeah, coming from this place of not wanting to view the world in a lens that isn't fair, and kind of maybe not wanting to sit in the space of maybe realizing that this is a really gendered issue and how that makes people feel in the room. I think that's a really interesting space of tension for young people, at least in my classrooms over the past couple of years.
Thank you. And I think one of the reasons why I think it's important for us to have this conversation is because if young people are coming from a space of, we need to be fair and we need to take it on a case-by-case basis, not only are we missing, the reality around gender-based crimes, but we're also then marginalising other already marginal identities. So if we're thinking about, fairness and not actually talking about structural inequity, then where are we sitting about in people who are victims of domestic violence, who might be Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, who might be LGBTIQA+, who might be people living with a disability, migrant, refugee women. So, I think that it's really, did anyone actually want to have a reflection or a comment about how that gender ignoring lens then further marginalises other people as well? Jean, did you have something?
I had something just to say, like, on dynamics as a whole, like what Alicia and Zach were saying about how, like, dynamics, like, they can be useful, like, statistically, like, it's useful data, but also they can be so harmful in the fact where, like the self-fulfilling prophecy, or like the stereotypes that are like drilled into society and stuff like that. Because in like same-sex relationships, or between like people that don't identify within the binary, like, there is no gender to base that dynamic off, and there is still domestic violence and abuse very present in like between those people as well, and like different marginalized groups and stuff like that. Like, even thinking back to learning about sexual education in school and how I was saying like the queer community doesn't have the right representation, there's so many other marginalized groups that aren't being represented either.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Jean.
Amazing. Well, yeah, we might move on to topic 4 just because time, and I'm sure we can have these kind of discussions forever, but time. So I want us to move us on to topic 4, and so this is when we're discussing the fact, oh, sorry, not topic 4, we're going to move on to topic, oh yes, no, topic 4. And it was going on from that gender ignoring lens, but it's funny because the young people in the research were talking about this gender ignoring lens, the fact that we're not wanting to look at domestic violence with gender in mind, yet they also were recognising the fact that gender played a role in the conditioning that young people faced around domestic violence. And so around kind of women getting a lot of conditioning around the dangers, around risk, around safety, and just the interesting tension and difference between then the conditioning men get and the idea that maybe there's not a lot happening in that space potentially. So before we jump to panel chats, we're going to have our last video, movie magic.
We talk about domestic violence a lot within our female friendship groups, but we don't really have that communication with our male friends. And I think it's because there's like a sense of uncertainty for them and they don't really know what to say, hence why they don't feel comfortable to confront those statistics. Growing up, the message was always be on guard, look out for your other female friends, and the world is not a safe place to be as a woman. I feel that fear almost daily, even walking from the bus stop to my house, which honestly isn't that far, it's only a couple of minutes, but I would still feel scared. Take out my earphones, you know, hold my keys really tight and just speed walk to my house.
I personally have never felt physically unsafe, but I have felt, I guess, pressure to act in a certain way. But I just don't think it equates to how the women in my life have felt. Almost every woman I know has been physically afraid at some point in their lives.
When I talked to my male friends about it, they definitely did ask, what can we do? And I said, it's the little things that mean a lot, and it can alleviate a lot of anxiety and worry for us. So for example, crossing the road when a woman is walking alone. She can see you, she can see that you're not anywhere in her vicinity and that she's safe. When there's a shared responsibility between men and women, it means that the burden is alleviated from women. It makes us feel more supported because, you know, growing up, it's like, it's always girls look out for one another, women, you know, support each other. But we need to spread the message that everyone has to support one another in order to create a safe space.
I think definitely men need to start leading the charge, but I think both parties working in unison is probably where the best work will get done, when men and women are listening to each other about how to move forward with the problem.
If we can express how we feel now and talk about, you know, what everyone can do to alleviate this problem, I think it would help a lot of young people in the long term.
Amazing. And now I'd be really curious to hear from everyone around your own experiences or the experiences of people you know around that idea of gender conditioning, and if it's something that you see really differently from kind of women to men and that kind of perspective. So Alicia and Zach, I might throw to you first.
Okay. Yeah, the ideas behind the video and the message that the guys portrayed do really resonate with me. I know there are a lot of women in my life that have told me that they've had the same experience. But just on the other side of things, like what Josh was saying, yeah, it's just there's definitely an imbalance between the conditioning between both sides, both parties. So yeah, the message it really does hit home for me. I have a lot of women in my life that I really do care about. So I would like things to change. So
Yeah, I guess, yeah, with the gendered conditioning, I mean, even me, I'm like, you know, going for a walk around the block, and if I have my AirPods in, make sure you don't have the music too loud. If you hear a car coming up, kind of just wait and see, are they gonna like stop near you and try and kidnap you, you know? And when you're walking around, just take notice of who's around you. If you see a young guy, maybe cross the road, or just keep your eye out, and be very wary and self-aware of who is around you, what is around you, and kind of always be on edge. So, yeah.
Just to add on to that, just from a male's perspective, our conditioning is similar but not as extreme, I would say. Like things like being aware of your surroundings is a very big thing amongst us guys, but it's crazy because we have to be aware of the same people that women have to be aware about, which is men. So I know a lot of the times when I'm out, or some of my friends out, it's always like you're looking for the shady characters, you're looking for who's a potential threat, who could do you harm, and then you gotta make sure you're ready if anything goes down, which is a sad reality for women and men, I would say. But yeah, like the video was saying, there's definitely a lot more that women would have to be wary of than men, from my own experience. So.
Zach, I love how you're talking there around the fact that it's interesting. It's maybe not necessarily that one's getting less conditioning than the other, but the conditioning is very different. And so for women, the conditioning is very much around risk and assessment and fear and safety. And it's similar for men clearly, but it's completely different structure of conditioning. And so that way of when we think conditioning as well, we're not just talking about what happens in school, we're talking about what happens as soon as we're littlies, as soon as we're out in the world with our family, as soon as we're watching media, consuming these sort of messages, we're starting to get these gender conditions. And it's interesting because I'm from Darwin originally. I moved to Melbourne, and as soon as I told people I was moving to Melbourne, the first things I got told was how to walk with my keys in my hands, in my fingers at night, and what I should do when these stuff happens, and you're going to a big city, Lauren, you need to do all this stuff. And my male counterparts that were also moving to Melbourne, same age, same area, same all the things, didn't get any of those conversations, but also didn't get a conversation like in the video about how it spoke to, actively changing their behavior to create safety. And I want to go to the next kind of point around what I see as responsibility in this space, and the idea of, who's having that responsibility around removing or getting outside of this idea of gender conditioning. And Jean, I'm just going to chuck that one to you of, what do we think of responsibility in this space?
Yeah, I think that I related a lot with the constant paranoia thing, and it's really unfortunate, but that's how I was brought up as well, and as a woman of color in Western Sydney, especially. But also made me think when Zach was talking about how you also look out for the shady characters and stuff. A lot of my friends are most of my friends are ethnic and stuff, but a lot of my male friends of color around we all live around Western Sydney, and they've told me that they have to watch out for where they're going, or if they're looking at someone the wrong way, because there are situations they'd be brought into just based on the fact that they're Islander and stuff like that. Is also it's really heartbreaking to know that that's the reality, but that's another aspect of what people look for. And Malika and I actually had a really good conversation about how even though as women we've been brought up to be so cautious, and it does affect you a lot. Alternatively, maybe we were trying to see from the other perspective of men haven't had the need to watch out for relationships being hurtful towards them, so they might be less likely to recognize when they're actually in an abusive or toxic relationship, friendship wise or relationship wise. And we also were talking about how that is a terrifying reality in itself, where even though we're always on guard, it's made us more observant towards toxic behavior and those stepping stones. I really like that metaphor of stepping stones. I think that was really a good one. But yeah, it's really interesting to see how it is from both ends.
Definitely. And I'd be really curious, Zach, just to ask around what made you want to be an ambassador and work in this space and work with young men? Because I think, yeah, when we think of that kind of gender difference, there's a lot of the idea of, you know, women go into the space because we don't want to be unsafe and we don't want to, you know, be in this kind of world. And I'm really curious for you in that perspective of what made you want to be in the space and work with young men.
Well, if I'm honest, I didn't know a whole lot about domestic violence. One of the main reasons why I joined was I had a friend that was already part of the program, and I'd seen a lot of change in her, a lot of positive change, and how like just her conviction in the way that she would talk about the different experiences she would have. Also, on top of that, now I've seen a lot of violence, and I've experienced a lot of violence, and I've also perpetrated a lot of violence on other men. So for me, I wanted to change, and I also wanted to show, especially for young brown kids that look like me, that you can do positive things, and you can show that there's a way to break this cycle, I guess. So for me, yeah, it was just something that I felt like was the right move to go and the right thing to do. And then, yeah, I'm still here. So
doing amazing work. Oh, amazing, Zach. I just want to give you like a big hug / high five. But I won't because technology. Before we jump into the Q&A, because I know there's a lot of really amazing questions coming in and we really want to get to that and have time for everyone to go through. But I'd really love everyone to even just quickly have a moment to comment on this, because obviously the research that this is all talking about with young people argued and how important it is that young people be actively involved in making changes and in things revolving around young people, around education, around respect relationships, around the need for domestic violence to be kind of changed into a young perspective lens. And I'm really curious what's the best way for researchers, policymakers, program designers, these people that are making potentially these big decisions to actually engage with young people? As just a really quick question for like a very quick answer.
I think that it's important to change the conversation from like women being careful, like on that specific note of like what Malika was saying, it's important to change the conversation from women being careful to like everyone being respectful and aware. And like having that dialogue changes heads, hearts and minds, and that's like really important. And like the way ANROWS has been through the research report, the video campaigns in this webinar, like we appreciate when organizations meaningfully come and engage with young people and youth services and give us a platform to like preserve, protect and promote our voices. And things like this encourage people with lived experience to come forward and share their experiences and help the future generations.
Amazing. Alicia and Zach?
Do you want to go? Okay. I think some ways where we can do that is even if like it comes down to funding more organizations and groups that go out and, you know, do that kind of more groundwork and, you know, go talk to students, go talk to peers, and like as we do have peer-to-peer workshops, or even when having social media infographics and things like that, using language that young people understand. Because I feel like, for example, I think we were speaking about this with Dean, the term of red flag, how that I think you didn't really understand what the term red flag was, but for a lot of young people, when you say red flag, like, oh, I know what you mean. So whether it's like kind of changing the language to suit the younger generation, because then obviously because we are the target audience, so it'd be easier for us to understand. So yeah.
Nice. Yeah, well, at least
Period.
Succinct, I love, yeah. And I definitely can hear what people are saying there around the fact that to engage young people, you need to go where young people are. You need to go on the social media, you need to engage in that language. I think there's an understanding. Yeah, like not just expecting young people to step into an adult space or to magically find their way to your programs, your research, your policy, but to go into spaces young people are and, you know, try to use that young people language that I pretend I still know. Diane, shall we kick off a bit of a Q&A?
Awesome, thank you so much. And I loved those last few reflections. And I think as we go into the Q&A, I think it's really important for all the people here to realise that you do have access to some very, very wise and articulate young people who have been part of this process all the way along. And I know in our conversations, they have been very appreciative of the way that ANROWS has engaged them in conversation and the care that's been taken in this space. So I guess this is my little reminder from me, the old person here, to just continue that care. Are you laughing because I'm old?
You don't look a day over 21, don't worry.
Yeah, thank you, Jane. I'm so happy to be old. But to continue the care that has been part of the experience of Alicia, Zach, and Jean all the way along in the questions that you asked. So if you have any questions, and we've got quite a number sitting here, please go to I think it's in the right-hand side of your screen. I should know this off the top of my head. The question icon. It's a great place to find it on the right-hand side of your screen. Pop in your questions. So the first question that I have is, does the panel believe primary prevention strategies to reduce violence or stop abuse before it starts would be more supportive than supporting a victim after the abuse has occurred? Jean?
I think they're both extremely important, and I don't feel like they're comparable, because the early intervention is like at schools, at homes, and then the aftercare is like support services and like medical services and stuff like that. So I think I don't even know if I can say as important as each other, because they're so like, in my mind, I see them as like on different levels, and they're both necessary. So I'm not really sure the definitive answer for that, but I would say that they're both very, very important. I don't think I could choose either one of them as more important than the other.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that we see a lot of this tension between, you know, and sometimes, and I'm not sure if this is where the question came from, but sometimes it comes down to funding. You know, are we going to fund primary prevention or early intervention? And my answer to that always is both. They're very different things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Next question is for Erin. So Erin, you get honorary young person here. So just a couple of questions related to the research design or recruitment. The first one is there a reason that there was only one Indigenous young person in the study?
Mostly just recruitment is just the way that the cards fell, unfortunately. We would have loved to have spoken to more, but the kind of recruitment that we used, we went through a recruitment company. We had the funding available to do this, and given the topic that was under discussion, we wanted to make sure that there weren't sort of any biases in a kind of, we have to be wary as ANROWS to not get some men's rights activists and other groups kind of jumping in on our research. So it was mostly just to mitigate that. We went through a recruitment company, particularly as we were speaking to 16 to 18-year-olds. That's a really hard group to recruit. And we were trying to recruit across lots and lots of demographic things. And unfortunately, it just fell that way that there was only one Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander person participating. Yeah.
And I think this second question also, you know, leads in from that, but was the purpose of the research to unpack and understand conceptualisation of violence in heterosexual relationships only? Just wondering because of the 50-50 inclusion of males and females, but no non-binary or gender diverse young people.
Yeah, so we did give non-binary and gender diverse young people an opportunity to participate, but again, it's just how the recruitment sort of fell. So no young people in our study identified with those gender experiences. And in terms of the kind of lens that we applied in the study, ANROWS has a focus predominantly on gender-based violence towards women, and the NCAS also has a focus predominantly on gender-based violence towards women. So our remit in the study was to kind of unpack the kind of hetero kind of perspective, and unfortunately that kind of dominates the space, not only in terms of research but in terms of what Jean mentioned earlier in terms of respect for relationships education. It is really unfortunate that that continues to be the main lens, and it means that the certain types of domestic violence and intimate partner violence within non-heterosexual relationships does tend to get a little bit pushed to the side. But we tried to combat this a little bit in the study by having the gender neutral names, and a lot of the young people in the study didn't necessarily see them as heterosexual relationships either. And I think that's really important. It's something that I couldn't really mention in my discussion. It's in the report, and they also avoided gendering the people in the scenarios as well. They often referred to them as they because they didn't want to accidentally misgender. So the young people are just amazing in this space, and one of the recommendations coming from the research is that more qualitative research needs to be done, perhaps particularly with LGBTIQA+ young people, on what they think is domestic violence and abuse in queer relationships, because of course it manifests slightly differently. So more work needed, more funding needed, not just for research, but especially for programs like Body Safety Australia and R for Respect and Men for Respect. I'd be remiss not to mention them as well.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so somebody has asked, so we're recognising red flag behaviours. How do we go about challenging them? So being that young people are often heavily engaged on social media and other messages that promote unhealthy attitudes, how do we challenge and ask young people to reconsider the messages that they're consuming? That's a really big question.
I guess within our work, when we are talking about red flags and unhealthy traits within relationships, and we have, some students who say, hey, I think this, and we're like, and we would classify that as a red flag rather than shutting down that student and be like, no, you're wrong, we're not going to discuss it. I kind of view it as a good thing, because without that young person stepping up and saying, hey, this is what I think, we wouldn't be able to unpack it then. So then, once they bring up their viewpoints, we then unpack it and we, question, well, why do you think like that? And sometimes it can be stemmed from intergenerational trauma and things that they have experienced at home and seen with relationships, whether it's with their other friends or at home. So I guess having those conversations with young people, that is how we can combat those red flags and, yeah, change the message.
Awesome. And do you think that trivializing of red flags on social media is gendered? So do you see that those conversations happening, that really sort of make jokes about red flag behavior, do you think that's coming from one gender rather than the other, or do you think that all young people are doing that? Jean, do you want to?
I think that what Zach was saying earlier about how they kind of like glorify toxicity within like interpersonal relationships is like something that does happen to like all genders, but I wouldn't say everyone's indulging in that. And also with the question about how to recognize red flag behavior and how to prevent like young people from being subject to it, I'm coming from a perspective of like just me and my friends, really, because I don't have like a group of people that I can like influence or like that I'm meant to guide, like R for Respect, for example. But a little bit of the therapist friend, I just kind of like advise anyone that shows me like signs of them being distressed by a situation or anything, that like reestablishing boundaries can happen at any time. And it's very important that if you're recognizing a red flag, that you don't just like it's important, like recognizing it is the first step, but then going and like trying to prevent yourself from being a part of that is also really important as well. Yeah, so like reestablishing boundaries in the same way that you can like choose with consent, like if it's there or it isn't, even those invisible barriers and those non-verbal boundaries, you can like change that at any time. Those are not like, those are fluid things that are not like permanent to you. You don't set them or anything, and that's really important for like young people to know.
And I love that idea, Jean, because I see a lot of this conversation being, well, you know, that's a red flag, so now I have to make a decision. I either, you know, throw the entire relationship in the bin, or I'm okay with that behaviour. And what you're actually saying is,
you don't have to settle for anything. Yeah.
You can re-establish those boundaries. You can have those hard conversations. You can. There's actually a pathway that you can follow. Thank you for that.
There's a third option. Yeah.
There's a third option. So question for Alicia around the gender ignoring lens. So you made a point at some stage, and the question is, how do we challenge this deep-seated cultural idea that women are routinely deceitful and manipulative?
Yeah, because I think we've seen with the Depp and Heard case within social media, a lot of the messaging is, oh yeah, so it has brought to light men, domestic violence against men, but it has also pushed that message of women are always lying. Women, they're lying about their cases. Oh, they're just making it up. They're being dramatic. And I guess, how do we combat that? Well, I guess within our work, it is always just having those conversations and, you know, asking young men or young women, or any young person, why do you think like that? What has made you come up to the decision that, oh, they're lying, they're being deceitful? It is just having those conversations, because then you get to unpack and really understand where they're coming from also, because a lot of the time, as I was saying before, a lot of intergenerational trauma and a lot of, you need to understand where that young person is coming from. Why do they think like that? For you to then be able to connect with them, to then change their mindset, or, allow them to view it from a different perspective. So, yeah.
I think the Depp Heard case has just actually shown us how thin the veneer is of the progress that we have made, from this space of believe women to now having to, start all over again almost in that space of breaking down. Well, hang on a second, believe women only if they're the perfect victim, and having to have these more nuanced conversations. I know that we're really close to time, and I have a lot of questions left, so I'm trying to pick out the ones that will, be of interest for all people. I think one of them for Zach, what do you think would assist boys and men in feeling comfortable in calling out their mates' behaviour?
Make them feel comfortable.
Yeah, how can we get more boys and men speaking up in like male spaces if the behaviour is disrespectful or dangerous?
I think first and foremost, if it is dangerous, then safety first. So if you do feel like by speaking up you will be in harm's way, then probably best not to do or say anything. If it's a mate, then like my view is, if you're not comfortable enough to talk about things to your mates, then are they really your mates? So maybe first think about that as well. But in terms of actually calling them out, I know everyone's different, but my thing is like, if it's scary, like the only way to get through it is to just take it head on. So if you want to call out your mates, it doesn't always, when people hear the word call out, it's always a lot of negative connotations attached to it. But you can call out your mates in a healthy way. You can pull them aside and say, hey bro, like I didn't like the way you did this and that, and I just wanted to let you know. And then, from there, the conversation can branch out into something fruitful and healthy. And other ways is, a lot of the times it's better to just take them to a private space rather than calling them out, as that might challenge their manhood, I guess. But yeah, I think probably that's the best way. And if you just don't feel safe, then look after yourself first.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Zach. And I guess one last final question. What could we be doing better in respect for relationships education? Just if you could wave a magic wand, all three of you, and go, I would really love to see this one thing happen in this space, what would it be? Maybe we start with you, Alicia.
Ooh, tricky question. I guess one thing is always more funding, because with the funding then you can do more things, you know, reach more schools, branch out further than the Gold Coast or further than Brisbane and reach more young people. Yeah, that's about it for me.
Fund it like it deserves, loud and clear.
Yeah.
What about you, Max?
If I could have anything in the world, I'd say mandatory respectful relationships and consent education within school curriculums, so that everyone can get a taste of, you know, of what we're doing. And like, I think to me, it's just as important as learning English and math, because once you leave school, you might not use those skills, but you'll always have the skills that you need to navigate relationships in your life and how to be safe in relationships and things like that. So that'll be my number one wish.
Your number one, and Jean.
I think inclusivity is the one thing I would pick if I could wave my magic wand. And I think that what comes with inclusivity is not only between like marginalized groups and all individuals, also inclusivity of all types of different violence and abuse training or respect that goes into a relationship, and training for all educators, because their attitude will affect their students' attitude, and what they want to teach is what we're going to learn. So
Absolutely, 100%. Thank you so much, Jean.
Amazing. All right, I have the pleasure of wrapping us up, and I know we could all sit here probably for another 3 hours and talk more about this stuff and go through questions, but thank you so much to all our amazing young people in the panel. Thank you so much, Erin, the amazing illustrations that have been going on, and to the amazing audience that have been listening to this such important conversation. And I'm hoping getting a lot out of it and taking it back into the spaces you're in, so that we can all continue to make incredible change in people's lives. So thank you so much all for being here. Just a little housekeeping-y stuff. So the webinar recording will be available on the ANROWS website soon. So please tell colleagues, please tell friends, tell your grandma, just let everyone know so they can watch it and have fun and get this amazing information. The illustrations and videos will also be available on the website soon. As you exit the webinar, there will be a little bit of that lovely after survey feedback moment. So please give feedback. It's really helpful for webinars as they move forward. So please be honest and all those things. And for any researchers tuning in today, if you're working on any projects around violence against women, you can submit your projects to ANROWS at the Register of Active Research on the ANROWS website. It's a centralised and publicly available database of domestic and family violence research currently underway. It would be amazing to get any research that's happening at the moment onto that database so everyone can see. I'm Lauren French, and with the UNCAS, and we have been very honoured to be facilitating this panel discussion. Thank you so much all for being here, and goodbye for now.